This is now coming to the end of our presentations. We have lucky last. Our final presentation today comes from Sally Neville, and Sally is a PhD candidate at the University of Queensland, and she's going to speak to us about the all-encompassing nature of care in motor neuron disease. So welcome, Sally, and if you can share your presentation and prepared speech, that would be wonderful.
Thanks, everyone. Sorry, I'm struggling a bit with voice today, so I have a pre-recorded presentation, which may be a little more formal, so my apologies for that.
Totally fine. Thank you so much, Sally.
Hi, I'm Sally from the University of Queensland School of Biomedical Sciences and the UQ Centre for MND Research. And today I would like to present my findings from my work with caregivers of people living with MND in one of the studies from my PhD thesis. The study is called The All-Encompassing Nature of Caregiving in MND. So I'd like to start by giving a quick rundown of the MND caregiving landscape. MND is a fatal neurodegenerative disease with an average life expectancy of 3 to 5 years from diagnosis. It's characterized by progressive muscle weakness, leading to difficulty with movement, speech, swallowing, and eventually breathing. In some cases, physical disability is also accompanied by behavioral and cognitive changes like frontotemporal dementia. And caregivers of people living with MND are known to face high caregiver load and burden. On average, caregivers of people living with MND spend 9.5 hours a day in their caregiving roles. This load increases up to 15 hours a day at the end stages of MND. Because of the rapid progression of MND, caregivers are constantly required to upgrade their skills in order to appropriately care for their loved ones. This often involves very specialized care tasks and equipment like hoists, non-invasive ventilation, cough assist machines, and peg feeding and maintenance. MND caregivers also face high physical and manual handling loads involved with moving and transferring their loved ones, and frequently report musculoskeletal injury associated with this. Caregivers also report mental health challenges, including anxiety, depression, and challenges with maintaining social connections. They are also at risk of complex and ongoing grief after the loss of their loved ones. The qualitative descriptive design with phenomenological undertones was used in this study and was conducted through a pragmatic lens, enabling alignment with multiple forms of inquiry to address the study's contextual aims. The primary objective was to understand the experiences of the Australian MND caregivers and the challenges they face. Given the focus on lived experiences and perceptions, phenomenological undertones were incorporated to support experiential understanding while maintaining a primarily descriptive approach to ensure that findings remain grounded in participants' accounts. Content analysis was also used to develop interpretative themes of the caregivers' experiences. In-depth semi-structured interviews were conducted with 12 current and former caregivers of people living with MND via the Zoom online platform. Participants were recruited through specialist MND clinics and the MND Australia Lived Experience Network. Participants were selected to obtain a representative sample that reflected the demographics of caregivers of people living with MND in Australia. The ages of caregivers range from 33 to 70 years, including current and former caregivers from urban, regional, and rural areas. Caregivers were mostly female and partners of people living with MND. This reflected the demographics of people living with MND in Australia, who are more likely to be male and cared for by their partners. However, male caregivers and an adult child who cared for their parent were also included in this sample to ensure their representation. Content analysis with significant levels of abstraction and interpretation was used to identify caregivers' perspectives and experiences on the burdens and challenges associated with their M&D caregiver role in 5 interconnected themes. It begins before diagnosis, the relentlessness of care, traversing the M&D healthcare and support landscape, changes to social connection, and caregiver well-being. Now I'm just going to briefly explain these 5 themes. In each case, I have presented a representative quote of each theme. Feel free to have a read of these quotes while I give an explanation for each of the themes. In It Begins Before Diagnosis, caregivers discussed how their journey as M&D caregivers began for many participants well before their loved one's official diagnosis of M&D. Caregivers express many difficulties and concerns relating to the process of getting to and then ultimately receiving their person living with M&D's diagnosis. Caregivers shared their experiences with diagnosis in 2 sub-themes. Firstly, diagnostic delay, where caregivers explained the challenges associated with dealing with uncertainty in the diagnostic period, which, because of the elimination-based diagnostic process of M&D, was often for long periods of time, for some in the case of years. Secondly, caregivers' experiences of the delivery of diagnosis were shared, with caregivers noting that diagnoses were often delivered in a blunt and unempathetic manner. Additionally, many caregivers felt there was inappropriate delivery of education and support at this point, leaving caregivers and their people living with M&D unsure of how to proceed now that they had received an M&D diagnosis. Following diagnosis, caregivers transitioned into their new M&D caregiver roles, which transcended care responsibilities. These roles, if not immediately, eventually became all-consuming as their person living with M&D's disease progressed. In this theme, caregivers discussed the unrelenting nature of their caregiving roles and how their role affected their employment and their ability to work, and therefore their financial circumstances. Also, the complexities of accepting and receiving help, both in acknowledging and accepting help from a caregiver's perspective, but also knowing when to offer help to the person living with M&D. Additionally, there was added complexity associated with finding appropriate help, with family and friends and sometimes even professional carers actually adding to the caregiver's loads. In traversing the M&D healthcare and support landscape theme, caregivers discuss the complexity of obtaining appropriate care and support for their person living with M&D. This was not limited to the home environment, but also extended to navigating the external M&D health and support landscape. Many caregivers found it challenging to determine what services and supports were available and how to access these for their person living with M&D. This traversal of the M&D healthcare and support landscape was explained by caregivers in 7 sub-themes. Decision-making, I had to research all that myself. Health services, support services, financial support schemes, equipment aids and accessibility, and finally research. In theme 4, changes to social connection, caregivers consistently reported changes to their relationships and social interactions as a direct result of their caregiver role. These changes and stresses to relationships occurred at varying levels of interaction, including partner relationships within family units, in friendships and social circles, and at a broader community level. At a family unit level, partners reported challenges with maintaining intimacy with their loved one living with M&D, and difficulties moving between the carer and partner personas. In the case of children, perspectives vary based on the age of the person living with M&D's children. In the case of younger children, caregivers reported mourning the relationships that their children should have had with their parent living with M&D. For older and adult children, caregivers were concerned about the extra load and stresses that having a parent with MND placed on their children. Regarding the impact of caregiving on maintaining relationships with friends and social circles, caregivers reported losing friends who were unable to cope with the changes in their circumstances. Caregivers also reported challenges associated with dealing with members of the public and the lack of patience and empathy associated with dealing with people living with disabilities. However, on a more positive note, caregivers also explained the importance of the new friendships and relationships formed from within the MND community, as well as the camaraderie and support that these relationships fostered. The final theme of caregiver priorities, reflecting the burdens and challenges they face, was caregiver well-being. While personal well-being was a priority for caregivers, they reported prioritising their person living with MND's well-being over their own. However, from a personal perspective, caregivers reported that their roles affected their well-being in two main areas: mental and physical well-being. From a mental well-being perspective, caregivers reported challenges with mental health, including stress, anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress, and complicated grief. Some caregivers reported being able to access appropriate formal assistance to support their mental well-being, while others reported difficulties with finding and accessing appropriate mental health support. Also, some caregivers reported preferring not to access formal mental health support, but rather focusing on other strategies like mindfulness and exercise to help support their mental health. From a physical health perspective, caregivers reported three major areas of concern. Firstly, musculoskeletal load associated with the moving of their person living with MND and the potential injuries that this caused. Secondly, getting appropriate sleep was concerned for caregivers, particularly at end stages of MND, where non-invasive ventilation and turning and moving of the person living with MND during the night became a factor. And lastly, some caregivers reported challenges maintaining their own nutrition amongst their caregiving load, with the intricacies of maintaining the person living with MND's nutrition taking priority and caregivers eating what and when they could. This study explored Australian caregivers' perspectives of the burdens and challenges they face in their role caring for a loved one living with MND. The 5 themes identified across participant interviews highlighted that beyond the physical strain of care, caregivers experience ongoing challenges navigating complex health systems, coordinating support, and advocating for appropriate services. These challenges are layered onto existing family, occupational, and household roles and require constant adjustment to routines and daily life. However, what is particularly important for caregivers of people living with MND is how deeply these themes of burden and challenge are interconnected, with each theme affecting caregivers' experiences associated with other themes, making it difficult to develop and successfully implement specific interventions to help support caregivers of people living with MND. What does this mean moving forward? Obviously, there needs to be more timely and appropriate support available for caregivers of people living with MND. But the pervasive and interconnected nature of the MND caregiver role makes this particularly difficult. Because of this, it is likely that system-level changes are required to adequately support caregivers of people living with MND. One way to walk towards this is to promote caregiver status within MND multidisciplinary teams, allowing caregivers to actively participate in care plans and the ongoing management of their person living with MND alongside health and support professionals. Greater contribution by and recognition for the caregiving role within MND enhances the positive aspects of caregiving, which is known to be beneficial for caregivers' mental well-being and quality of life. Integrated models of care are known to enhance bottom-up leadership strategies within healthcare and promote lateral communication between all members of the care and support team. The promotion of integrated models in M&D could be a useful way in promoting caregiver status within care teams, but also to assist with some of the navigation and healthcare access challenges that caregivers face. In addition to system-level change, formal one-on-one mentorship and support from other caregivers within the M&D community appears to be sought after by caregivers, so they can ask questions and bounce ideas of individuals with circumstances similar to their own and that have a unique understanding of what the M&D caregiving role entails. Lastly, I'd like to thank you for listening today. It's been an absolute privilege to talk at this forum. But I'd also like to give a big thank you to the fabulous and inspirational caregivers and their people living with M&D who participated in this research, and also to the Stein, No and Packer groups for their assistance and guidance during this research study. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Sally. What a amazing presentation and just a beautifully rich qualitative study that you have been able to show us today. And I particularly loved your acknowledgement of the interconnectedness of all of those domains and just, I guess, the reality of why interventions can be so difficult because of the interconnectedness among all of those, different challenges and the nuances experienced by carers of people with MND. I guess, please, I encourage our audience and our fellow panelists to pop in the Q&A if they have any questions. I guess one of my questions, I was quite struck by the physical things that you were talking about, the physical needs of carers, and I guess we know that that the caring role really does put people at greater risk of ill health themselves. And I guess I think it was really great that you were able to elucidate some of those issues that carers were experiencing around physical load, nutrition, and sleep. I guess I just wanted for you to, are you able to reflect more on some of those challenges? And I guess, the types of support that are already available or that you think probably need to be implemented in a sustainable way for carers to protect their health.
So I guess from a physical load perspective, because of M&D's progression and it often being quite rapid progression, while a lot of the time there is equipment and aids available to assist caregivers, often because things are happening so rapidly with MND, often that equipment just doesn't get there in time. And often you find that the equipment is arriving after it's actually of no use for the person living with MND. So obviously we need, there's some issues there with service provision and how we provide that equipment in a timely manner. Additionally to that, like as you said, sort of the actual load, often for caregivers, there really is no relief. And so obviously increased respite would be important, but that's also quite difficult because the actual care needs of people living with MND are actually quite specific and quite high skilled a lot of the time. And often the way that the person living with MND is cared for is specific to them, and their caregivers know their very individual needs. So it's very difficult in this circumstance to obviously get respite for caregivers of people living with MND. I think that maybe only answered one part of your question. I can't quite remember what the second part was.
I think that's really, really interesting insights, and I guess really speaks to, the difficulty that is experienced by carers and maybe the changes that we need at a service provision, in terms of
a lot of it
trajectory planning, like planning for what's next if we know that progression is likely.
Yeah, I think there's a huge amount of complexity involved with MND. And unfortunately, also progression and trajectories are very homogeneous as well. So different people have different trajectories, which just
yeah.
adds to the complexity. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that the observation around sleep is also such an, important one because I guess we know from a psychological perspective that sleep is also so closely linked with people's mental well-being, isn't it? That,
Yeah.
we know
Yeah.
that people who are getting poorer sleep, poorer quality sleep, lesser amounts of sleep are also then more likely to exhibit symptoms of anxiety and depression. So I guess really important to meet those physical needs because it sounds, like they have flow-on effects to the
For
psychological
sure.
needs.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. I guess my second question was around now, this is your PhD, isn't it?
Yeah, it's part of my
So
PhD. Yeah.
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 Oh, so are you finished your PhD?
So my PhD has been submitted and hopefully it will be conferred in the next few days. Yeah. Yeah.
Amazing. Okay, right. So
Yeah. Yeah.
that's
So
really
very close.
exciting. Fantastic. Well, that was my second question was just around, can you tell us more about I guess, the broader body of work of your PhD, and I guess where it
Where it
ended,
fits in.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess my broader PhD was sort of around experiences in MND. So in a similar kind of strain, I've done the same for people living with MND. And then after sort of looking at experiences of the MND community, I also looked at an intervention and an app for the self-management of care, and just looked at just some initial levels of the community's opinions around the app, whether they thought it helped. So just sort of assessing whether it was, really getting to the people that it needed to, I guess. Yeah.
Brilliant. Wow. Well, that is fantastic. And also, it's so great for, our fellow panel members who are still, some of whom are still going through this. I know that, Hannah is midway through her PhD, and it's always great to see when someone's pressed that submit button and
Yeah.
the
Getting
the
close.
feeling is wonderful, isn't it? There's
Yeah.
nothing quite like it. Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Sally, for your amazing insights and your beautiful, rich, qualitative description of those experiences of carers.